During the Mesozoic era, dinosaurs provided the majority of the large herbivores on Earth. There were sauropods and ornithopods and ceratopsians and pachycephalosaurs and armored dinosaurs. And so most of the large vertebrates on land eating plants were dinosaurs. And then 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs disappeared suddenly, including the horned dinosaurs, the hadrosaurs, which were quite diverse and doing great up until the end of the Mesozoic era. And so then in the aftermath, who ate the plants? Well, for a brief period of time, there weren't large herbivorous vertebrates in terrestrial ecosystems. But mammals, which had really not accomplished much during the Mesozoic era, they then diversified to fill this niche, including a group known as the condylarths. Now, most people have never heard of condylarths. They were certainly diverse, maybe even originating before the Mesozoic era ended, but certainly the Paleocene epoch was their great diversity. There are sites where the majority of fossils that are found are condylarth fossils during the Paleocene. Maybe it should be remembered that when the age of mammals begins, most mammal groups alive today were not present. The majority of the mammalian orders, which we have today, they arise in the Eocene. And so the Paleocene had mammals, but to a large degree, they were strange to us, including these condylarths. Condylarths were diverse. They were common in North America and Europe, but they spread to other continents as well. And they varied a great deal in size. They are extinct today. The last of them became extinct in the Oligocene epoch, but their descendants are with us today. These are the herbivorous hoofed mammals, from buffalo to cattle to deer to giraffes to rhinos to hippos to tapirs, horses, llamas, etc. And so condylarths are significant in that they are the ancestral mammals which adapted to an herbivorous lifestyle, and their descendants would then diversify and form the large herbivorous mammals which we have today. So as I said, that there were different groups. Once again, they were quite diverse in the Paleocene. And so I have this video which goes into some of the different families of condylarths. Once again, they were quite a diverse group. From this diversity, some would be the ancestors of the hoofed animals alive today that have an even number of toes. So when you look at a hoof print and you see the quote cloven hoof, it's not really a cloven hoof, it's two fingers. And so the big nails are covered with keratin. These are the hooves. This would be things like deer and cow and camels, etc. So some condylarths gave rise to the even-toed hoofed animals. These we call artiodactyls, while some gave rise to the odd toes. So if you look at a rhino or a tapir or a horse, they have an odd number of toes, and so those are perissodactyls. So both the artiodactyls, the even-toed ungulates alive today, and the perissodactyls, the odd-toed, are descended from condylarths. But as the condylarths then started to diversify, they produced different families, and so the families began to diversify into the lineages which we see today. Now, obviously, we want to look at those which started to become more adapted, to the groups we have today. But there were a couple early offshoots, such as the Mesonychians. So while the majority of the condylarth descendants were adapting to an herbivorous lifestyle, at the beginning, they hadn't gone as far as modern ones do. And so there was a group that varied from the others and then became carnivores. At this time, there were not yet dogs or cats or bears. And so early in the age of mammals, mammals did become carnivorous and take over that role vacated by the theropod dinosaur extinction of the major carnivores on Earth. But the carnivorous groups we have today, dogs, bears, cats, they arise later. And so the Mesonychians are condylarth descendants, which had actually adapted to carnivory. So the early condylarths had not yet been fully herbivorous. And just like you can, for example, find bears, which are essentially entirely carnivorous, like polar bears, while others are almost entirely herbivorous, like pandas. There was some variation in the early groups. Some of these were huge and could have skulls which were 3 feet long. A 3-foot long head is much larger than any of the carnivorous mammals outside the whales alive today. And so the Mesonychians were an offshoot of the condylarths, which adapted in the early portion of the Cenozoic era to be dominant predators, but then they became extinct and then would later be replaced by the groups we have today. As we look at the lineages which are alive today, we see a nested hierarchy of a family tree, as we would expect. So all of them are related, but they're related to varying degrees. So that we'll see groups within groups, a family tree with some branches coming off earlier with the distant relatives. And the pigs and their relatives, this would represent, an early branch. So pigs are less closely related to the later ones. There were a diversity of pigs, such as the entelodonts from the Eocene to the Miocene. Some of these could be 6 foot tall at the shoulder. And while pigs aren't carnivores per se, they are omnivorous and they can prey on other animals and include meat in their diet. So while entelodonts might not be listed as carnivorous mammals once again per se, nevertheless they would have been formidable predators and they could have preyed on other organisms. Once again, many people aren't that interested when you hear the name of a modern group. So pigs, oh, how varied are pigs today? Well, certainly fossil pigs were different from modern pigs. But even modern pigs, can have great variation. I mean, if you look at the warthog and you look at its teeth, these are modified teeth, so quite different from the ancestral teeth, their position, their size, etc. There were wild pigs which lived in throughout the United States, including the eastern United States. We usually associate these with other countries in South America, but we did have peccaries in this area. There was a pig that had a unicorn-like horn. And once again, groups vary. So, while a normal pig's head might look like this, there are variation space. So here's the Barbarossa, which is a modern pig relative. In addition, the pigs are related to the hippos. And so hippos have not always existed, just like pigs have not always existed. And so from the condylarth descendants, there arose some groups which gave rise not only to fossil pigs, which are no longer with us, but then also fossil hippo relatives, which are no longer with us, as you'll see. So this family was like hippos and related to them from North America, Africa, Europe, and Asia. They lasted much of the Cenozoic era and became extinct, but from them came the hippos, which are alive today. This would include the pygmy hippo, which has kind of a typical pig-like skull, but then the better known hippo is very different, and they had a much wider range than they do today. So as we get into the groups which are better able to eat plants, many of the ruminants have a four-chambered stomach, but pigs and camels, they have a three-chambered stomach. And so many of the adaptations for herbivory, which we see in the most advanced groups, developed in steps. So here you'll notice that there is the order artiodactyl, the artiodactyls, but then there was a suborder Ruminantia within that. So once again, there are groups within groups. You know, you have the ancestors of the artiodactyls, and from that then came the ruminants. So pigs and hippos, they do not ruminate the way that most of the artiodactyls do. What that means is they chew their food and they swallow it, but they have skeletal muscle along their esophagus as opposed to smooth muscle. And then they can regurgitate this food into their mouths again, chew it again, and swallow it a second time. See, if you can eat grass, well, you know, and other plant material, well, that's wonderful, because you know there's so much plant material on Earth. The problem is it is nutrient poor, and so there aren't a lot of nutrients in this vegetative material, and you're going to have to process it to a greater degree. So they have to be very good at chewing, and actually these ruminants, they chew their food twice to rip up cell walls, and thus to give you know, even a greater access of their digestive tracts to the materials in these plant cells. And then they have separated their stomach into multiple chambers, which can house different populations of microbes, which then can break down the cellulose and other materials in plants, which are hard to digest, that, for example, we can't. So here you see cows. Notice they are, quote, chewing the cud. They're not eating grass. They're now regurgitating the grass that they had eaten a while ago and chewing it a second time and then swallowing it a second time. Now notice how big their bodies is. Obviously you can be successful this way. You can maintain a big body, but grass is not nutrient rich. And so you're going to have to just be extra efficient at processing this vegetative material. So, you know, chewing it twice and having a multi-chambered stomach with different populations of microbes. This is how that is managed. And so the groups of, you know, herbivores which we have today, they evolved in stages. So pigs and hippos, they had some but not all of those traits. So within the suborder of the ruminants, there were infraorders. Obviously, I'm just pointing that out. I'm not going to emphasize it, but the videos go into it, you know, as far as we can break these groups into subgroups, and they can be broken into subgroups. One subgroup includes the extinct protoceratids. Many of them had, you know, elaborate bony horns on their heads. So here you see the protoceratids, especially in, say, North America. These were common herbivores. And then there's the modern family of mouse deer. So they are ruminants, but they are in their own infraorder, less closely related to the other ones, such as the order Pecara here. And so once again, the groups we have today, they evolve in a family tree with gradual branching. And these videos, you know, will go through the branches in greater detail. So this is just going to be a quick summary of those. So by the Eocene, you might notice their legs are now different because there are animals which have a modified foot so that they're walking more and more on their toes and have a modified ankle that will be shared in the way that deer, cows, um, camels, and bovids walk. And so this infraorder is is the larger infraorder, having many modern groups, um, including and many extinct groups as well. One of the earlier branches here were camels. Now, once again, I think the first reaction of many students is that, oh, camels, I know those. Some have one hump, some have two hump. We can go on, that's it. But they were far more diverse than that. They actually were born in North America. Now, one of the huge climactic things happening in the Cenozoic era is that the planet started to get cooler and drier. Now, ultimately, there would be ice ages, but that's far in the future. As it got cooler and drier, grasses spread. Now, grasses, they cover so much of the earth today. They make up the prairies of North America, the savannas of South America, the steppes of Asia, the pampas of Argentina. So there's so much grassland today. But prior to this, there hadn't been. Grasses really weren't that common, and they certainly didn't cover the earth like they did today. So it was midway through the Cenozoic era that, as the earth became cooler and drier, that grassland spread. And then a number of animal groups then adapted to eating grasses. Camels were among them, and camels originated in North America and would spread to other continents from there. So it's interesting that camels are well known in the Old World and in South America, but they actually originated in North America, and they were quite diverse. Some camels were much taller than the camels of the largest camels of today. Some had elongated necks and were giraffe-like. And then camels include llamas and guanacos, which began in North America and then went to South America 4 million years ago when the Americas collided. So camels are a group of artiodactyls, which were once much more diverse than they are today and originated in North America. And the same thing with giraffes. Very often when students hear giraffes, they think, okay, I know giraffes, long necks. Well, there is another giraffe alive today, not just the long-necked, well-known giraffe, but there is the African okapi, a short-necked giraffe. And in the fossil record, giraffes were quite diverse, known from Africa, Europe, and Asia. And they had a variety of different antler forms. I think technically these are called ossicones. And some had a breadth of their ossicones that would resemble that of a moose. Some were elephant sized. And so the majority of giraffes that have ever lived were short-necked giraffes, like the okapi, which is still alive today. And it may be that having a long neck actually evolved multiple times, although there's only one long-necked giraffe today. And so giraffes are ruminant artiodactyls. There is a artiodactyl from the western United States known as the pronghorn. And so this is not closely related to many of the other ruminants. But once again, North America and its grasslands had a number of artiodactyls living there, and it will move in a second. And if you go out west today, the pronghorn is a ruminant artiodactyl native to the Americas. There are also then the bovids. And so once again, we're going in groups and getting into smaller and um, smaller groups. So the bovids, they arise in the Miocene. By this point, grasses are spreading. The ones which reach Africa diversify into a large number of antelope. So there are small antelope. There are very large antelope. You know, notice their horns can have a diversity of forms. Um, uh, Sheep and goats are also included in this group, as is the auroch. And this is an auroch, and it is thought that aurochs were the progenitors of the modern cattle alive today. Um, I apologize. I think I probably should have had this deer video previous to this. So I'm sorry, I'll get back to bovids in a second. Deer vary a great deal. Some deer are very short and lack antlers and have pronounced canines. So this is true of deer in Vietnam today that are small, have pronounced canines, and lack antlers, and also true of early fossil deer. All right. So uh, Deer are interesting that unlike bovids, they don't have the bony base of their horns, which they keep throughout their lives. And unlike bovids, it's not males and females which have antlers. It's just the males in almost all species. The exception would be reindeers. In reindeer, males and females form antlers. Um, but in deer, it is just the males and only during part of the year. So it seems that, you know, fighting with other males in courtship battles seems to be a primary function of um, the antlers. The Irish elk were the largest deer, and each antler could have a span of, I'm sorry, my fault. The two antlers together could have a span of 6 feet. And so these were enormous extinct deer that early humans spreading throughout Eurasia encountered. Um, the subfamily Bovinae includes cattle and bison. And so once again, you know, we could, you know, split it into smaller and smaller groups with, you know, the group of yaks splitting off. Um, Buffalo or bison are so closely related to cattle that they can actually still interbreed. And so it is possible to have a herd of cattle, which have both bison and cattle in their ancestry. And actually, a lot of bison in the American West do have a little cattle in them. There's actually an effort to kind of weed those out to try to get herds of bison, which, you know, are not, you know, do not have any of the other um, you know, cow DNA in them. Um, there have been various species of bison, and they were quite common in both Europe and the American, throughout much of the Americas. Even a subspecies of bison, which lived in eastern North America, became extinct shortly after the colonization. Um, one species could reach more than 7 feet tall at the shoulder, and another even larger than that, 8 feet tall of the shoulder, with horn spreads which were much greater than the um, modern bison. Right? And so once again, these are artiodactyls. So if you look at their hoof prints, whether it be a deer, a cow, a goat, a sheep, or a buffalo, you'll see that there are, you know, two toes with very large nails. So the hoof is just an enlarged nail used to hold their body's weight. And obviously, um, many of these have become extinct before humans. Some of them have become extinct because of humans, and the modern bison has, in the United States, only a fraction of the range that it once did. It was pushed very close to extinction. And so today, there are large herbivorous mammals. There are cows and antelope and deer and giraffes and hippos and pigs and buffalo and goats and sheep, etc. All of these are artiodactyls, having an even number of toes, and all of these are descendants of condylarths, like this one up top. So condylarths starting in the Paleocene, when they were extremely diverse, the most common fossils, in many areas are condylarth fossils. They were the mammals which began to eat plants, occupying the ecological niche vacated by the extinct dinosaurs.